Philadelphia. Can I see your hands? Who's been in this auditorium before? A good amount of you? Good, good. I want to introduce myself. My name's Adam Feldman. I'm one of the librarians here. I'm actually the coordinator of educational programming here at the Free Library, at this branch, at the Central Library. But in some ways, this isn't just one library. It's a dozen or more special collections, special libraries within these walls. And one of them is the Regional Foundation Center. Has anyone been to the Regional Foundation Center? Can I see hands? A good number of you. Who here work for a social service agency or an art organization or a nonprofit of almost any type? All of you need to become better acquainted with the Regional Foundation Center. It's really like a real hidden gem of this library system. And in some ways, it's the midwife of tonight's program and event series that we're having here today. The Regional Foundation Center serves nonprofits. It has kind of databases and sources necessary to do serious research, to build your nonprofit, to figure out fundraising campaigns, to otherwise deal with discourse in nonprofit management and development. And we know that our partners InLiquid and Juvenile Law Center are users of it, and I think some of the conversations that led to this whole series were really born in that space. So I want to invite all of you who may not have been there to come and bring more of these conversations out so we can bring more life. Now, I also want to say that there's more to come. I hope some of you will come back on August 3rd for a book talk we're having. Jean Goldstein and Chris Moraff are talking about A Boy with a Knife, a case of a particular egregious juvenile imprisonment case. And the music department, after August 4th, will have a few surprise additional additions working with Beyond the Wall, a music program in prison. So we'll have some special events related to that at the end of August. But I've talked to you far too long. I'd like to invite to the stage Jessica Fireman, who is the Associate Director of the Juvenile Law Center. Jessica, would you come to the stage and kick off tonight's program for us?
Thank you, and thank you so much to the Free Library for hosting us. And I also want to thank the NEEKC Foundation, which has been supporting our work on solitary confinement. And welcome to all. Being in isolation to me felt like I was on an island all alone, dying a slow death from the inside out. These are the words of a young man in California who was talking about his experience in solitary confinement. For those of us who are lawyers working on this issue, we hear from our clients about their experiences, and it's our challenge to talk to policymakers, to courts, to our friends and family, to our community, to try to communicate what we've heard, and it's really a struggle. We struggle with the task of conveying the physical, mental, the emotional consequences of solitary confinement. So today we're incredibly grateful to be joined by many people collaborating together to paint a fuller picture of the problem, to start a really vital conversation about solutions. InLiquid has partnered with us to bring this exhibit and panel together, leading the way in connecting visual arts and social change. As I think many of you probably saw upstairs, Richard Ross has more in one photograph than we can say in 10 legal briefs. Our panelists, who you'll meet in a moment, come at the issue from 4 different perspectives. They're sharing personal, legal, psychological, and artistic insights. We want to start our evening with a video, which also features Richard Ross's photographs. Video not only identifies a problem, but also highlights the voices of juvenile justice administrators already working to make a change. We're really excited to be working on this issue at a moment when we see things starting to change. So let's start the video.
Imagine yourself as a teenager, spending days, weeks, or months in rooms so small you could touch the walls with both hands. Imagine having nothing constructive to help pass the time, no one to talk to, no paper and pen, books, photos, or cell phone. You're left alone with your thoughts. You stare at the door. You become anxious, jittery. You might start talking out loud to yourself. Eventually, you may start believing you see things that aren't there. You scream at the people who put you there, even if they can't hear you. You don't become remorseful or contrite. You become more angry. This is what thousands of young people housed in U.S. juvenile and adult facilities experience each year. Research shows that solitary confinement for longer than a cooling-off period is not an effective tool for reducing behavioral incidents or improving the safety of facilities. Nowhere is the damaging impact of incarceration on vulnerable children more obvious than when it comes to solitary confinement. Solitary confinement can lead to long-lasting and devastating effects on youth, including trauma. psychosis, depression, anxiety, and increased risk of suicide and self-harm. And even more devastating, more than 50% of all youth suicides in juvenile facilities occur while young people are isolated in solitary. Many organizations have researched and advocated for a change in policy and practice of solitary confinement, including children's advocacy organizations, medical and mental health associations, and organizations for administrators of juvenile detention facilities. We must do better for our kids in detention by giving them the chance to grow and succeed in life. We must address rehabilitation of the whole person by offering more education, mental health services, and drug treatment. A kid alone in a room does not have the chance to increase his or her skill set. We reduced solitary confinement by 89%, and at the same time, violence decreased by 22%. Instead of being youth in solitary, we must offer alternative programs. In addition to mental health counseling, we started a family engagement program. We changed the visiting hours so youth could see their family members, and family could also participate in meetings. A sea change is happening. Results show that alternative can work. And on January 25, 2016, President Obama prohibited the use of solitary confinement for youth in federal custody. Change within the state and local level must start today. With you. We have a moral responsibility to our youth to stop solitary for kids.
The problem of solitary, and a real thanks goes to the many people who helped work on this video, including our friend, the advertising agency M, who volunteered the time to put that together. And the problem of solitary confinement is really best understood in context. And this evening, this exhibit of the cell and photographs and panel presentation are part of a larger effort that's happening across Philadelphia right now. Right now at Eastern State Penitentiary, there's an exhibit placing the problem of juvenile solitary confinement within the broader context of mass incarceration and the history of mass incarceration. And right now at the African American Museum is shedding light on racial disparities in the criminal justice system that's also linked to the problem of solitary confinement. So both of these exhibits really challenge us to think about what to do to change the juvenile justice system and a criminal justice system to bring young people back home into their families and communities. At this point, it's my honor to introduce our moderator, Solomon Jones. Many of you will know his voice from WURD Radio and know that he's an award-winning columnist, a national voice on marriage and fatherhood, and a local inspiration on literacy, ending homelessness, and numerous other social justice issues. We're incredibly grateful that he's lending his voice to this conversation. Thank you.
Thanks so much for that wonderful introduction, for that powerful video, and for a great start to this event this evening. I'm Solomon Jones. I'm a columnist for the Philadelphia Daily News and a morning host on 900 AM WURD Radio. And it is my pleasure to join you this evening for this event. Before I introduce our panelists, I just want to call your attention to the fact that each of you have been given a little card. And if you're like me, you got a little pencil too. They're real cute. So if you have a question, you can write that question down. We will collect and ask our panelists select questions from you during the audience Q&A section of tonight's event. And now it's my pleasure to introduce our panelists for juvenile injustice and solitary confinement. Of course, this is a panel discussion around this very important issue that has caught the attention of the White House as well as advocates around the country. You'll see how important I am by the fact that my name tag just fell on the floor. Johnny Perez is our first panelist. He is a non-attorney advocate at the Urban Justice Center Mental Health Project, a civil service firm that provides legal and social work services to people with serious mental illness. He signed MHP's Safe Reentry Project, where he assists people with mental illness and histories of incarceration. Please give him a hand. And Naomi Goldstein, PhD, professor of psychology at Drexel University, co-director of Drexel's JD PhD program in law and psychology. Goldstein, director of the Juvenile Justice Research and Reform Lab at Drexel, seeks to improve juvenile justice policy and practice across the country. Please give her a hand. And Richard Ross is not the police commissioner, but he is a photographer, researcher, and professor of art based in Santa Barbara, California. Ross has been a recipient of grants from National Endowment of the Arts and was awarded both Fulbright and Guggenheim fellowships. His most recent work, the Injustice series, turns a lens on placement and treatment of incarcerated American juveniles. Please come, Mr. Ross, and give him a hand. And finally, Marsha Levick is Deputy Director and Chief Counsel of the Juvenile Law Center, which she co-founded in 1975. She has successfully litigated on behalf of children in both the juvenile justice and child welfare systems and spearheaded Juvenile Law Center's litigation arising out of Luzerne County, Pennsylvania juvenile court judges corruption scandal known as Kids for Cash. Please come on up and give her a hand as well. So we're going to get right into our discussion. Since the discussion is centered on the powerful exhibit that many of you have seen by Richard Ross, our first question will be for Richard. Images have played roles in movements throughout history, but particularly in the civil rights movement, which used televised images of brutality to move public opinion, and the current movement concerning police violence, which has made use of cell phone video and other images. Richard, how do you hope your use of photography will shape the conversation around juvenile solitary confinement?
First, thank you for having me and forgive me for being so underdressed compared to everybody else. We just got out of prison at Gatorford. I went there with my wife for about 4 hours interviewing Joseph Linga, who's been incarcerated for 63 years, 5 months and 1 day for a crime he did after a one-day trial. The images, it comes from a tradition of Jacob Reese, Lewis Sign, Gordon Parks, Danny Lyon, Earls Moore. The whole idea is to witness. The whole idea is to, the world of institution and brutality can be really harsh if it is skewed. And my goal specifically with these images is to make people understand that organizations like Marsha, like the AKC, are great in terms of data and in terms of policy. And my goal is to make sure that people know that there are lives at stake and to understand the size of the people that you're dealing with. So when it shows you what a 9-year-old, 10-year-old, 11-year-old actually is when they're in solitary.
So I want to follow up that question and just ask this one regarding how those photographs are distributed. Because great to have them here, but one of the things that has really multiplied the effect of images now is the internet. So what role does technology play in you sharing these images that you want to use to shape this discussion?
Basically, the work is punishing, to use a bad word, but doing the work is difficult. And my goal in doing this is to make organizations like the Juvenile Law Center, make them available to them at a really nominal cost. So just get the image out there. Normally, an artist likes to have fine art matted, framed, graded, and exhibited at museums. My goal is to have impact legislation. So I basically decommodified it. And they go up with push-ins, they go up with bulldog clips. I don't care, as long as they get out there and part of the discussion.
Absolutely. So it's interesting that you talked about greater because that kind of segues into my next question. Where solitary confinement is concerned, Philadelphia was really on the leading edge of use of solitary confinement with Eastern State Penitentiary, which was completed in 1829. And it was known not just for the architecture there, which was copied in prisons around the world, but also for that use of solitary confinement. Charles Dickens visited in 1842, and this is what he said. He said, "The designers do not know what it is that they're doing. I hold the slow and daily tampering with the mysteries of the brain to be immeasurably worse than any torture of the body." Naomi, was Charles Dickens right when he said that? And if so, how does the psychology of solitary confinement actually work?
Sure. So I think there are really two issues when you're thinking about solitary confinement. So one is the issue of imposing really negative experiences on a child or an adult, right? So this is a situation that is anxiety-inducing. I mean, how many of you walked into the clear cell downstairs or upstairs? I mean, I was in there too. It was fairly horrifying being in there with other people, there not being a door, being able to see through it. Imagine being a child, walking there, and the door shut, and it's petrifying not knowing you're going to get out. As a child, it's very hard to imagine the future. Everything is in the moment. And so this inducement of what for many people is a very traumatic experience, and the symptoms of anxiety and depression and hopelessness and fear that come out of it are really quite terrible and can have both short and long-term impacts. The other piece of it that I think people don't talk about as much is the absence of the positive experiences, and that's critically important. And we can certainly talk a little later about some of the developmental issues that are associated with this. But you're depriving kids of normal experiences, normal social interaction, normal stimulation, normal education, normal physical experiences. And it's those two things combined that can really contribute to both long-term, short-term issues where we certainly see increased rates of suicidal ideation, suicide attempts, and that long-term capacities in a variety of ways, mental health-related, educational-related, cognitive functioning.
You know, it's interesting to me that Eastern State now has this exhibit around mass incarceration. We often hear the number 2.3 million in terms of the number of people we have incarcerated here in the United States. I wonder if Eastern State stopped using this with grown men when they had that model. How did we get to the point where we were using it with children?
That is a very good question. I think solitary confinement and isolation come under lots of different names. Some are as a form of consequences, some are a form of protection, some are considered to be safety for self, safety for others, and I think what's doing people is really an important question, and I think we've certainly seen many negative consequences in lots of different type situations with any types of uses.
Yeah, thank you. And one of the most famous cases was that of Khalif Browder. He was a young man who was sent to Rikers Island when he was 16, accused of stealing a backpack. He never stood trial, was never found guilty of any crime, but he stayed at Rikers Island for 3 years, nearly 2 of those years in solitary confinement. There was activism around it. He was finally released. When he was released, he went home to his parents' home and he committed suicide. Like Khalif Browder, Johnny Perez, you spent some time in solitary confinement as a teen. How did your story and experience compare to his?
Yeah, first I'd like to say thank you for having me. It's very important when we talk about these issues, we involve the voice of the people that are directly affected by the issue. So I'm very honored to be here. And when I think about Khalif, I also add, they also had multiple suicide attempts during his stay there, and it went completely ignored by correctional staff of a number of different levels. And then, unfortunately, 6 months after he came home, he succeeded. When I think about my own experience, 16 years old on Rikers Island, if you know anything about Rikers Island, or ever seen the inside Rikers Island, you'll know that architecturally is very depressed space. The colors make you sad. Hospital grays, things of that nature. And 16 years old, arrested for gun possession, I go to Rikers Island for the first time, and as I'm waiting for the housing unit to be placed in the housing unit, question says, Johnny Perez, you're going up to the butcher shop. I'm like, butcher shop? I didn't know they had beds inside the kitchen here. Right? He's like, no, actually, butcher shop is a housing unit. It's too upper. And the reason we call it the butcher shop is because that's where most of our cuttings happen. And 16 years old, I'm thinking, now hindsight as an adult, I don't know what bothered me more about that statement. Was it the fact that it's called butcher shop, or the fact that it was coming from a correctional officer who was also supposed to protect me from the butcher shop and all the things that happened there? Once I arrived there, if you don't know anything about juveniles in this case, specifically Rikers Island, there are a lot of gangs in Rikers Island, and even groups who may not be labeled as gangs kind of behave like gangs in order for a number of different reasons, maybe protect themselves, finding solace and love inside these spaces, of formation in these spaces. And I didn't belong to a gang. As a result of that, there were certain quote-unquote privileges that were not afforded to me, whether it was a certain mattress or using a certain toilet bowl or even using a phone. In my case, I would use a phone to call my lawyer, and this gentleman who was a lot bigger and taller and stronger than me said, you can't use a phone, this is a bud phone. And I said, I just wanted to talk to my mother and find out, and he pushed me and turned around him with the phone, and we were both sentenced to 60 days in solitary. During the hearing, the hearing officer did not care even, he said, you got into a fight, you should know better, you handle the problem a whole lot differently. He said, they know that jail you turn to correctional officers about problems because that in itself creates more problems, Once I arrived in solitary, just my luck has it, the person who's giving out the food was also a detainee, belonged to the same gang, the person that I fought, and he worked breakfast and lunch. So for the first 2 weeks of 6 days, I didn't eat breakfast, lunch, I only ate dinner. And dinner was at 4 o'clock, breakfast being about 7 o'clock in the morning, you have to be standing up, fully dressed at the door. During that time, I think about, I'm heading out to Goldstein to describe some of the psychological ramifications of it. And I remember, feeling a great sense of hopelessness, feeling real alone. I remember counting the bricks on the wall. I remember being so hot that the wall starts to sweat in a lot of different cases. It gets real quiet a lot of times, so quiet that you can hear your own heartbeat. And other times it gets so loud in the sound of people screaming, yelling, singing, rapping, even just talking out loud to hear another human voice, that it gets really loud to when you can't go to sleep. And if you try to put it underneath the cover, you get woken up every hour on hour because prison policy and procedure said that they have to see skin when they walk by. I remember feeling very angry, very distrustful of authority, and then I probably can spell human as then, I'll label it as very humanizing now in the sense that the only person after this gentleman, hopefully he went home after those 2 weeks, but the correction officer who did walk by never even acknowledged my existence. And I mean by that, I never said hi, never said, hey, how you doing? How's it going today? Anything like that. Things that we can take for granted on a day-to-day basis, but when it doesn't happen over a prolonged period of time, it really does something. After a while, I started to think, well, maybe I am just a criminal. Maybe I am meant to be here. And I couldn't understand why I had done so bad that not only placed me in this space for what felt like forever, but also, going to visit, see my mother handcuffed. And, why is it so, what I did that was so bad that I was not worthy of or being denied my human right to hug the person who pushed me into existence, in a sense. And a lot of times I really couldn't make sense of that. I had to fight for commissary phone, my humanity, my dignity, a lot of different ways. And when I think about Khalif and the parallels is that we were both teenagers inside the same space, and the same people who were supposed to and had sworn to protect us were also either doing victimizing or facilitating the victimizing. And as a result of that, we have different ramifications. No one ever gets out of solitary. You survive solitary. And, sometimes people say, oh, but Johnny, you're so eloquent, and, you have a nice haircut. If you're impressed with anything that I say tonight with me as an individual, you think, well, solitary can't be that bad. Know that I'm just an example of what happens when we invest in people in our prisons, A. Two, right? You see grass, you're walking down the street, you see grass growing through a piece of concrete. You say, wow, look at that concrete made grass grow. You say, no, grass grew despite concrete. So I'm who I am today despite those experiences. Thanks for that share.
Okay. All right. So my next question is for Marsha Levick. And about the president's involvement in this. President Obama, in January, I believe, banned the use of solitary confinement for juveniles in federal prisons, citing some of the research that Dr. Goldstein talked about a little bit earlier. He says that the research found that practice leads to withdrawal, alienation, and the possible worsening of existing mental illnesses. Given that the president banned the use of juvenile solitary confinement in federal institutions, how many state and county institutions followed suit with that ban?
Yeah, that's a really important question. And let me thank all of you in the audience for being here this evening. I think both having Richard Ross here as